quiet village of Fenley Green, a sinister mystery unfolds at Harrow House. Blood stains delicate lace curtains, a stolen brooch reappears, poison taints a glass, and a threatening letter sparks fear. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and sharper mind, unravels a web of deceit, where love and betrayal hide behind every smile. Can she expose the culprit before trust is shattered forever? Dive into a chilling tale of secrets and suspicion. Chapter 1. The Arrival at Fenley Green. The train to Fenley Green chugged through the patchwork fields of the English countryside, its rhythm a soothing counterpoint to the sharp curiosity stirring in Miss Jane Marple's mind. She sat by the window, her gloved hands folded neatly over her black handbag, her eyes, bright and deceptively mild, taking in the blur of hedgerows and distant church spires. The invitation from Lady Beatrice Harrow had arrived unexpectedly, its elegant script urging Miss Marple to visit Harrow House for a restful holiday. But Miss Marple, with her knack for sensing undercurrents, suspected there was more to this summons than polite hospitality. People, she had long observed, rarely invited elderly spinsters without a reason, however well disguised. Fenley Green Station was a modest affair, its platform dappled with late afternoon sun. A porter, his cap askew, lounged against a stack of crates while a scruffy terrier sniffed at a lamppost. Miss Marple alighted, her sensible shoes clicking on the stone, and adjusted her hat, a practical affair with a single feather. She carried her sturdy umbrella, less for rain than for the comfort of habit. The air held a crisp edge, and she noted a certain stillness, as if the village were holding its breath. A young man in a tweed cap, presumably the driver sent by Lady Beatrice, approached and took her small suitcase with a shy nod. "Harrow House, ma'am?" he asked. She smiled her gentle, disarming smile and followed him to the waiting car. The drive to Harrow House wound through lanes fringed with blackberry bushes, past cottages with roses climbing their walls. The manor itself loomed at the end of a gravel drive, its ivy-clad facade both grand and slightly weathered, like an aging dowager in faded finery. Its tall windows caught the sun, and Miss Marple noted the lace curtains within, delicate as spiderwebs. Lady Beatrice Harrow greeted her at the door, her silver hair impeccably coiffed, her smile warm but tinged with strain. "Jane, how good of you to come!" she exclaimed, ushering her inside. Over tea in the drawing room, served in bone china cups, Lady Beatrice's composure faltered. "It's been unsettling here," she confessed, her voice low. "A brooch of mine went missing. Then there was that odd business with a guest falling ill after dinner. And now, whispers about Geoffrey, my nephew. I don't trust the village gossip, but I feel something's amiss." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes flickering over the room's polished surfaces, the mahogany table, the portrait of a stern Harrow ancestor, the lace curtains swaying faintly in the breeze. "Most curious," she murmured, her tone so mild it might have been mistaken for indifference. But her mind was already at work, sifting through the hints of discord. Lady Beatrice, she noted, twisted her rings nervously, a habit that spoke of worry beneath her polished exterior. That evening, dinner introduced the household. Geoffrey Harrow, a handsome man in his late 20s, had a restless charm, his laughter a touch too loud, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting an interruption. His fiancée, Clara Vane, was a delicate beauty, her auburn hair pinned elegantly, but her hands betrayed her nerves, fidgeting with her napkin. Dr. Ernest Quill, a retired physician with a florid complexion and a fondness for port, regaled the table with anecdotes, though his joviality seemed forced. Mrs. Lydia Trent, Lady Beatrice's widowed cousin, was sharp-tongued and observant, her dark eyes missing little. The servants moved quietly, a maid named Elsie, with downcast eyes, and a butler, Mr. Stokes, whose stiff formality suggested long service. As the meal progressed, Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly from her corner, a rhythmic backdrop to the conversation. She listened, her expression one of polite interest, but her mind catalogued every glance, every hesitation. Clara's nervous laugh when Geoffrey mentioned London. Dr. Quill's quick change of subject when the missing brooch was brought up. Mrs. Trent's barbed remark about newcomers that made Clara flush. The air, Miss Marple thought, was thick with secrets, like dust motes caught in a sunbeam. She recalled a similar dinner years ago, in a different village, where a single careless word had unravelled a crime. After dinner, as the group retired to the drawing-room, Miss Marple lingered by the window, her fingers brushing the lace curtains. They were exquisite, hand-stitched, the kind of work that spoke of patience and pride. But something in their pristine folds unsettled her, as if they concealed more than the view beyond. She turned back to the room, her smile serene, and resumed her knitting. Whatever lay beneath Harrow House's polished surface, she was determined to uncover it, stitch by careful stitch. Chapter 2. The Crimson Stain. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Harrow House, casting intricate shadows from the lace curtains onto the polished oak floors. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the breakfast room with her knitting in her lap, observed the household with her usual quiet attentiveness. The clink of porcelain and the murmur of conversation were interrupted by a piercing scream that shattered the morning's calm. It came from the drawing-room, sharp and unmistakable, and Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch as she rose, her movements unhurried but purposeful. The others at the table, Lady Beatrice Harrow, Geoffrey Harrow, Clara Vane, Dr. Ernest Quill, and Mrs. Lydia Trent, froze for a moment before hurrying toward the source of the cry. In the drawing-room, Clara Vane stood trembling, her face ashen, one slender hand pointing toward the window. There, on the delicate lace curtains, hung a vivid crimson stain, stark and shocking against the intricate white threads. It was unmistakably blood, its irregular edges suggesting it had been smeared rather than spilled. The room erupted into a chorus of gasps and exclamations. Lady Beatrice clutched her pearls, her voice trembling as she demanded, "What in heaven's name is this?" Geoffrey, his brow furrowed, stepped closer to inspect the stain, while Dr. Quill, with a physician's instinct, leaned in, his eyes narrowing. Mrs. Trent, her lips pursed, muttered something about hysterical nonsense, though her sharp gaze betrayed her unease. Miss Marple approached the curtains, her mild expression unchanged, though her mind was already at work. She noted the stain's position, high on the curtain, too high for a casual accident, and its uneven spread, as if applied with intent. "Most curious," she murmured, her voice so soft it might have gone unnoticed had Clara not turned to her, eyes wide with fear. "It's blood, isn't it?" Clara whispered. Miss Marple inclined her head slightly, neither confirming nor denying, but her keen eyes took in every detail. The curtain's pristine condition save for the stain, the absence of any nearby wound or weapon, and the faint tremor in Clara's hands. Lady Beatrice, regaining her composure, summoned the maid Elsie, who appeared in the doorway, her apron twisted nervously in her fingers. "Elsie," "Were these curtains clean last night?" Lady Beatrice asked sharply. The girl nodded vigorously, her voice barely audible. "Yes, ma'am. I dusted the room myself after dinner. There was no mark then, I swear it." Her eyes darted to the floor, and Miss Marple noted the flush creeping up her neck. A nervous girl, she thought, but was it fear or guilt? She recalled a housemaid from her youth, in a village far from Fenley Green, who had hidden a theft behind a similar show of nerves. Geoffrey, pacing now, suggested it might be a prank. Village boys, perhaps, or a careless servant. Dr. Quill, rubbing his chin, proposed a more medical explanation. Could be someone cut themselves, a nosebleed maybe, and didn't notice. But his tone lacked conviction, and Miss Marple caught the fleeting glance he exchanged with Clara. Mrs. Trent, ever acerbic, scoffed. "Nonsense! This is deliberate, meant to unsettle us, and I'd wager it's no outsider." Her words hung in the air, accusatory, and Clara flinched, her engagement ring glinting as she clasped her hands. Lady Beatrice, her face pale, insisted on calling the local constable. Within the hour, Inspector Crane arrived, a stout man with a methodical air and a moustache that seemed to bristle with impatience. He examined the stain, took perfunctory notes, and declared it likely an accident. "Probably a servant nicked a finger and didn't report it," he said, his tone dismissive. "I'll have a word with the staff." Miss Marple, standing quietly by the fireplace, her knitting resumed, thought otherwise. The stain's placement, its deliberate appearance, suggested purpose, not carelessness. She recalled a case in another village where a bloodied cloth had been a distraction from a greater crime. Was this, too, a diversion? As Inspector Crane questioned Elsie and the butler, Mr. Stokes, Miss Marple slipped away to the garden, her umbrella tapping the gravel path. The air was cool, scented with lavender and damp earth, and she found herself alone save for the distant hum of bees. Her thoughts were interrupted by raised voices from the rose arbor. Creeping closer, she glimpsed Geoffrey and Clara, their heads bent together in heated whispers. "You must tell her about the letter," Clara urged, her voice low but urgent. "If she finds out another way, it'll be worse." Geoffrey's reply was sharp. "No, Clara. We keep it secret. No one needs to know." Miss Marple stepped back, her presence unnoticed, and filed the exchange away. A letter, she thought. A secret. The threads of this puzzle were beginning to show, though their pattern remained elusive. Returning to the house, she found Dr. Quill in the library, poring over a medical journal with an intensity that seemed excessive for a retired man. She engaged him in conversation, her tone light, asking about his practice in London. "Oh, mostly routine cases," he said, but his fingers tightened on the journal's pages when she mentioned Clara's recent stay in the city. "She was under some strain, poor girl," he added quickly, his smile strained. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking rhythmically, and made a mental note of his unease. As evening fell, the household gathered for dinner, the atmosphere strained. The crimson stain had been cleaned, the curtains restored, but its memory lingered. Lady Beatrice spoke little, her eyes darting to Geoffrey, who avoided Clara's gaze. Mrs. Trent, relishing the tension, made pointed remarks about hidden motives until Lady Beatrice changed the subject. Miss Marple, eating her soup with delicate precision, observed it all. She noted Elsie's hesitation as she served, the way her hands shook when passing Dr. Quill's plate. She saw, too, Clara's untouched wineglass and Geoffrey's quick offer to pour her water, a gesture that seemed more protective than gallant. After dinner, As the others retired to the drawing-room, Miss Marple lingered in the hall, her eyes drawn again to the lace curtains, now pristine. She thought of her old friend Mrs. Bantry, who had once remarked that curtains hid more than views, they concealed truths. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Something was being hidden here, she was certain, and it was not merely a stain. The blood, the letter, the nervous glances, all were pieces of a puzzle she was determined to solve. She recalled a similar incident in her youth, where a single clue had unravelled a web of deceit. As she climbed the stairs to her room, her knitting tucked under her arm, she felt the familiar thrill of the chase. Harrow House held secrets, and she would uncover them, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 3. The Missing Brooch. The morning after the unsettling discovery of the crimson stain, Harrow House seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating further disruption. Miss Jane Marple sat in the morning room, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes flitting over the household with the quiet alertness of a bird. The breakfast table had been a study in strange civility. Lady Beatrice, pale but composed, had spoken of the weather. Geoffrey Harrow had been subdued, his charm dimmed. Clara Vane, her hands restless, had barely touched her toast. Dr. Ernest Quill had been jovial, though his laughter rang hollow. And Mrs. Lydia Trent had watched them all with her usual sharp-eyed disdain. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, had noted every glance, every pause, storing them like threads for a tapestry yet to be woven. The calm shattered when Lady Beatrice, entering the library to fetch a book, let out a cry of astonishment. The household converged to find her holding a sapphire brooch, its intricate filigree glinting in the sunlight. "My brooch!" she exclaimed, her voice a mix of relief and bewilderment. "It's been missing for weeks, and now here it is, in this vase." The vase, a delicate porcelain piece on a side table, was one Miss Marple had noticed before, dusted daily by the maid, Elsie. Its sudden role as a hiding place was as perplexing as the brooch's reappearance. Inspector Crane was summoned once more, his moustache twitching with irritation at being called back so soon. He examined the brooch, its sapphires winking mockingly, and questioned the staff. Elsie, her face flushed, swore she had cleaned the vase only yesterday and seen nothing. Mr. Stokes, the butler, confirmed her account, his stiff demeanour unshaken. The inspector, rubbing his temples, suggested a servant's prank or forgetfulness. Perhaps it was misplaced, and only now found, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Miss Marple, seated quietly with her knitting, thought otherwise. The brooch's return was too convenient, too timed. She recalled a theft in another village, where a stolen item's reappearance had masked a deeper motive. Was this a distraction, or a message? As the inspector departed, Miss Marple lingered in the library, her eyes scanning the shelves, the polished table, the vase itself. She noted its position, visible but not prominent, easily overlooked yet accessible. Someone, she reasoned, had placed the brooch there deliberately, knowing it would be found. But why return it, now, after weeks of absence? Her thoughts were interrupted by Mrs. Trent, who entered with a rustle of her dark silk dress, her expression one of barely concealed triumph. "So the brooch reappears," she said, her voice dripping with implication. "Convenient, don't you think, Miss Marple? Perhaps someone hoped to curry favour with Beatrice." Her eyes flicked toward the door, where Clara had passed moments earlier. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles clicking. "People do act from the strangest motives, Mrs. Trent," she replied, her tone so mild it disarmed the widow's sharpness. But her mind was alert. Mrs. Trent's insinuation pointed to Clara, yet Miss Marple sensed the widow's own motives were not entirely pure. She recalled a woman in her youth, much like Mrs. Trent, whose barbed tongue had hidden her own secrets. Later, Miss Marple sought out Elsie in the pantry, where the maid was polishing silver. The girl started at her approach, her hands fumbling a spoon. "Elsie, my dear," Miss Marple said gently, "you seem troubled. Is there something you'd like to share?" Her voice, soft and coaxing, had the effect of a confessor's. Elsie hesitated, then whispered, "I didn't take the brooch, ma'am, I swear. But I saw Miss Vane near the library yesterday before it was found. She looked frightened." Miss Marple nodded, patting the girl's arm. "You've done right to tell me," she said, though her thoughts turned not to Clara's guilt, but to why Elsie had chosen to speak now. That afternoon, Miss Marple took a turn in the garden, her umbrella shielding her from the sun's glare. The roses were in full bloom, their scent heavy, but her mind was elsewhere. She overheard Geoffrey and Clara again, this time near the summer house, their voices low but tense. "You should have told me about the brooch," Geoffrey said, his tone sharp. "I didn't know where it was, I swear," Clara replied, her voice breaking. "Someone's trying to make trouble for us." Miss Marple stepped back into the shadow of a yew tree, her presence unnoticed. The brooch, the letter, the stain. Each incident seemed designed to unsettle, to point fingers. But at whom and why? At tea, Dr. Quill entertained the group with a tale of a patient who had hidden valuables in odd places, his laughter a touch too hearty. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, noted his quick glance at Clara when the brooch was mentioned. She decided to probe gently, engaging him in a discussion about his London practice. "You must have seen many curious cases," she said, her eyes bright with innocent curiosity. "Oh, yes," he replied, but his fingers tightened on his cup when she mentioned nervous patients. "Some folk," he said, "let their fears get the better of them." His words were vague, but Miss Marple sensed a hidden meaning, perhaps tied to Clara's time in London. As evening drew on, the household gathered in the drawing room, the chic lace curtains now a silent reminder of the previous day's shock. Lady Beatrice, still shaken by the brooch's return, spoke of her late husband's fondness for it, a family heirloom. Geoffrey, attempting to lighten the mood, suggested a game of cards, but Clara declined, her eyes fixed on the window. Mrs. Trent, ever watchful, made a pointed remark about things turning up when least expected, her gaze lingering on Clara. Miss Marple, her knitting a steady rhythm, observed it all. She thought of a village scandal years ago, where a stolen ring had been returned to sow discord. Was this brooch a similar ploy? As she retired to her room, Miss Marple paused by the library door, her eyes drawn to the vase. Its delicate curves held no answers, but she felt the weight of unseen threads weaving through Harrow House. The brooch, the stain, the whispered secrets, all were part of a pattern, one she was determined to unravel. She recalled a saying from her old governess: "Things hidden in plain sight are often the hardest to see." With a faint smile, she climbed the stairs, her mind as sharp as the needles in her bag, ready to stitch together the truth. Chapter 4. A Poisoned Glass. The sun hung low over Fenley Green, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Harrow House. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the conservatory with her knitting, watched the household through the glass panes, her eyes as keen as ever beneath her placid exterior. The morning had been quiet. The tension from the blood-stained curtains and the reappeared brooch lingering like a faint mist. Yet Miss Marple sensed the calm was fragile, a prelude to another disturbance. Her needles clicked rhythmically, a counterpoint to the unease that seemed to seep from the very walls. Luncheon was served in the dining room, its long table adorned with silver and crystal that gleamed under the chandelier. Lady Beatrice presided with strained graciousness, her conversation about the village flower show a thin veil over her worry. Geoffrey Harrow, seated beside Clara Vane, was attentive but distracted, his eyes flicking to the door. Clara, pale and delicate, toyed with her fork, her appetite absent. Dr. Ernest Quill, his florid face flushed from the heat, spoke of a recent medical lecture in London, while Mrs. Lydia Trent, her dark eyes sharp, interjected with barbed comments about modern ailments. Miss Marple, at the table's end, ate her consommé with care, noting every nuance. The way Clara's hand trembled, the way Geoffrey's smile tightened when Mrs. Trent spoke. The meal proceeded uneventfully until Mrs. Trent, lifting her wineglass, took a sip and froze. Her face contorted, her hand flew to her throat, and she gasped, "My God!" before collapsing back in her chair, her breathing ragged. The room erupted into chaos. Geoffrey leapt to his feet, knocking over his chair. Clara let out a stifled cry. Lady Beatrice called for the butler, her voice shrill. Dr. Quill, with surprising agility, was at Mrs. Trent's side, loosening her collar and checking her pulse. "Belladonna," he declared after a moment, his voice steady but grim. "The symptoms, dilated pupils, flushed skin, suggest a mild dose, thank heaven." He ordered water and sent Elsie the maid for his medical bag. Miss Marple, her knitting set aside, observed the scene with calm detachment. She noted Dr. Quill's swift diagnosis, his hands steady despite the panic. She saw, too, Clara's untouched wineglass, its ruby contents glinting in the light, and Geoffrey's quick move to fetch water, his face pale but composed. Mrs. Trent, recovering slowly, sipped water and muttered about careless servants, though her eyes darted accusingly toward Clara. Inspector Crane was summoned yet again, his arrival marked by a weary sigh as he surveyed the scene. He ordered the wine decanter and glasses to be tested, but the preliminary examination, conducted by a local chemist, found no trace of poison in the shared decanter. "Perhaps a mistake in the kitchen," he suggested, though his furrowed brow betrayed his doubt. Miss Marple, however, was not persuaded by accidents. She recalled a case from years past, in a village not unlike Fenley Green, where a poisoned drink had been a calculated act, not a mishap. She approached Clara after the chaos subsided, finding her in the garden, her face drawn. "You didn't touch your wine, my dear," Miss Marple said gently, her tone that of a kindly aunt. Clara started, her eyes wide. I wasn't thirsty," she stammered, but her fingers twisted her handkerchief into knots. Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming, but her mind noted the evasion. Was Clara frightened or hiding something? Later, in the privacy of the pantry, Miss Marple spoke with Elsie, who was polishing glasses with nervous energy. "Elsie," she said softly, "you were near the decanter before luncheon. Did you notice anything unusual?" The maid hesitated, her cheeks flushing. I found a vial in Miss Vane's room last week, ma'am," she whispered. "It was empty, but it smelled strange, like medicine. I didn't say anything, I was afraid." Miss Marple patted her arm. "You've done well to tell me now," she said, though her thoughts turned to the vial's implications. Belladonna, she knew, was no common household item. Had Clara brought it, or was someone planting evidence? That evening, the household gathered in the drawing room, the atmosphere heavy with suspicion. Lady Beatrice, her hands trembling, spoke of closing the house and leaving for London. Geoffrey protested, his voice sharp, while Clara sat silent, her eyes fixed on her lap. Dr. Quill, pouring himself a brandy, offered a toast to Mrs. Trent's recovery, but his joviality felt forced, and Miss Marple caught his quick glance at Clara. Mrs. Trent, her colour restored, made no effort to hide her contempt. "Someone in this house has a wicked heart," she said, her gaze sweeping the room, "and I'll wager it's no stranger." Miss Marple, her knitting resumed, let the words settle. She thought of the crimson stain, the brooch's return, and now this poisoned glass, each incident a thread in a pattern she was beginning to discern. The poison, she suspected, was not meant to kill, but to alarm, to deepen the rift in an already fractured household. She recalled a similar case, where a small dose of poison had been used to manipulate, not murder. Who here had motive to sow such discord? Clara, with her secrets? Geoffrey, guarding his inheritance? Or Dr. Quill, whose calm expertise seemed too convenient? As the evening drew to a close, Miss Marple lingered by the dining-room window, her fingers brushing the lace curtains. They were pristine again, but their delicate threads seemed to whisper of hidden truths. She thought of her old friend Mrs. Bantry, who had once said that danger often hid behind beauty. With a faint smile, Miss Marple returned to her room, her mind weaving the day's events into the growing tapestry of her suspicions. The poisoned glass was no accident, and she was determined to uncover the hand that had poured it, stitch by careful stitch. Chapter 5. The Letter Revealed. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Harrow House, casting a soft glow on the polished surfaces, but the atmosphere within remained taut as a drawn bowstring. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her usual corner of the morning room, her knitting needles clicking with metronomic precision, observed the household with her characteristic blend of serenity and scrutiny. The events of the past days, the crimson stain, the reappeared brooch, the poisoned wine, had left a pall over the manor, and the residents moved with the wariness of those expecting another blow. Lady Beatrice, her face etched with worry, spoke little, her hands fidgeting with her embroidery. Geoffrey Harrow, his charm subdued, kept close to Clara Vane, whose delicate features seemed to grow paler with each passing hour. Dr. Ernest Quill maintained his jovial facade, though his eyes darted too often, while Mrs. Lydia Trent's sharp tongue cut through the silence with pointed observations that did little to ease the tension. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a discovery that morning in the drawing-room. While adjusting a cushion, she noticed a faint glint in the fireplace where ashes lay cold. Stooping with a care that belied her age, she retrieved fragments of a letter, its edges charred but its contents still legible. The handwriting was precise, the words stark. "End the engagement or face ruin. Your secrets will not stay buried." The signature was smudged, but the threat was clear. Miss Marple tucked the fragments into her handbag, her expression unchanged, though her mind raced. A blackmail letter, she thought, was a dangerous thing, like a snake coiled in the grass. She recalled a similar incident in a distant village, where a letter had unravelled a household's peace. Who had written this, and who was meant to receive it? At breakfast, the household's unease was palpable. Mrs. Trent, her dark eyes gleaming, remarked on the unfortunate incidents plaguing Harrow House, her gaze lingering on Clara. "Some people bring trouble with them," she said, her voice like a blade. Clara flushed, her hands twisting her napkin, while Geoffrey snapped, "That's enough, Lydia!" Lady Beatrice, distressed, called for calm, but Miss Marple noted the undercurrents. Clara's fear, Geoffrey's protectiveness, Dr. Quill's studied silence. She decided to probe further, choosing Dr. Quill as her first target. Over coffee, she engaged him in conversation, her tone light and inquisitive. "You must have seen many troubled souls in your practice, Doctor," she said, her eyes bright with innocent curiosity. "Did you ever encounter cases of blackmail, perhaps?" Dr. Quill's hand paused on his cup, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Blackmail? Rare, but not unknown," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "In London, I treated Miss Vane for nervous exhaustion, you know. She had her share of worries." His words were vague, but Miss Marple caught the hesitation, the way his eyes avoided hers. She nodded, her needles clicking, and filed the information away. Clara's past, it seemed, held more than nervous strain. Later, Miss Marple sought Clara in the garden, where the young woman stood by a bed of late roses, her expression distant. "You seem troubled, my dear," Miss Marple said gently, her voice as soothing as a lullaby. Clara started, then sighed, her shoulders sagging. Under Miss Marple's patient gaze, she confessed, "There was a man in London. A mistake. He's threatening to tell Geoffrey everything unless I pay him." Her voice broke, tears brimming. "I haven't told Geoffrey about the letter. I can't lose him." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind connecting the charred fragments to Clara's fear. Was the letter from this man, or was someone closer using her past against her? That afternoon, Miss Marple sat in the library, ostensibly reading, but her eyes followed the household's movements. Mrs. Trent lingered near the door, her ears sharp for any whisper of gossip. Geoffrey, pacing, spoke to Clara in low tones with his hand on her arm. Dr. Quill, engrossed in a medical journal, seemed overly focused on a page about toxicology, his fingers tracing the lines. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to motive. The letter, like the stain and the brooch, seemed designed to disrupt, to sow distrust. But whose hand was behind it? Mrs. Trent, with her spiteful tongue, might relish Clara's ruin. Dr. Quill, with his knowledge of Clara's past, could be playing a deeper game. Or was it an outsider, as Clara feared? As evening fell, the household gathered for tea, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Lady Beatrice, her hands trembling, spoke of her nephew's future, her voice tinged with hope and fear. "Geoffrey's inheritance depends on his marriage," she said almost to herself. "His father's will was clear." Miss Marple's ears pricked up. An inheritance, she thought, was a powerful motive. She recalled a case from her youth, where a will had sparked betrayal. If Geoffrey's engagement to Clara faltered, who stood to gain? Mrs. Trent, perhaps, through a distant cousin? Or was there another player, unseen? Miss Marple retired early, her mind a whirl of fragments, the letter, Clara's confession, the poisoned wine. In her room, she examined the charred pieces again, noting the paper's quality, the ink's precision. It was no hasty scrawl, but a calculated threat. She thought of her old friend, Mrs. Bantry, who had once said that secrets were like moths, drawn to the flame of exposure. As she prepared for bed, her knitting set aside, Miss Marple felt the threads of the mystery tightening. The letter was a key, but to what lock? With a faint smile, she resolved to find out, her sharp mind already weaving the next stitch in the pattern. Chapter 6. The Second Stain. The dawn broke over Fenley Green with a deceptive calm. The mist curling around the spires of Harrow House like a whispered secret. Miss Jane Marple, rising early as was her habit, sat by her window, her knitting untouched as she watched the garden awaken. The events of the past days, the crimson stain, the reappeared brooch, the poisoned wine, the threatening letter, had woven a complex web, and she felt the threads drawing tighter. Her sharp mind, cloaked in the guise of a frail spinster, sifted through each clue, seeking the pattern beneath the chaos. The household, she knew, was on edge, and she sensed another disturbance was imminent. Her intuition proved correct when a second scream pierced the morning stillness, this time from her own guest bedroom. Miss Marple hurried to the source, her steps measured but swift, to find Elsie, the maid, standing in the doorway, her face white as the lace curtains within. "Oh, ma'am," Elsie gasped, pointing to the window. There, on the delicate curtains, was another crimson stain, smaller than the first, but no less vivid, its edges fresh and glistening. A faint scent of lavender hung in the air, subtle but distinct. The household converged, Lady Beatrice, her hands clasped in distress, Geoffrey Harrow, his jaw tight, Clara Vane trembling visibly, Dr. Ernest Quill, his medical bag already in hand, and Mrs. Lydia Trent, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Miss Marple approached the curtains, her expression one of mild curiosity, though her mind was alert. The stain, unlike the first, was lower within reach, and its freshness suggested it had been placed mere hours ago. The lavender scent was intriguing, uncommon for a household accident, more suggestive of a woman's touch. She recalled a case from years past in a village far from Fenley Green, where a scent had betrayed a culprit's identity. "Most peculiar," she murmured, her voice soft but carrying a weight that silenced the room's murmurs. Lady Beatrice, her voice trembling, demanded answers. "This is intolerable. First the drawing room, now here. What does it mean?" Geoffrey, his arm around Clara, suggested vandals, but his tone lacked conviction. Dr. Quill, examining the stain, declared it blood, likely animal, though he could not be certain without tests. Mrs. Trent, her lips curled, remarked, "Someone in this house enjoys theatrics, and I'd wager they're closer than we think." Her gaze lingered on Clara, who flinched but said nothing. Inspector Crane arrived, his patience visibly fraying. He inspected the stain, took samples, and questioned the staff. But his questions yielded little. Elsie swore she had cleaned the room the previous evening, and Mr. Stokes, the butler, confirmed no one had entered since. The inspector, muttering about pranksters, promised to send the sample for analysis, but Miss Marple sensed his scepticism. She, however, saw purpose in the stain's placement. Her own room, a guest's private space, suggested a personal challenge. Was it a warning or a distraction? After the inspector left, Miss Marple examined the room herself, her movements unhurried. Behind the wardrobe, she discovered a hidden panel, its edges worn from use. Inside lay a small knife, its blade crusted with dried blood, the handle wrapped in a lavender-scented handkerchief. She left it untouched, noting its position, and discreetly informed Inspector Crane, who returned to retrieve it. His search found no fingerprints, but Miss Marple's mind turned to the handkerchief. Lavender, she thought, was no accident. Clara wore lavender water, but so did Mrs. Trent, and such scents were easily acquired. She recalled a village scandal where a hidden object had pointed to the wrong suspect, a deliberate misdirection. That afternoon, Miss Marple walked the grounds, her umbrella tapping the path as she pondered. She overheard Geoffrey and Clara near the orchard, their voices low but urgent. "This has to stop," Geoffrey said, his tone strained. "First the letter, now the this. Who's doing it?" Clara's reply was a sob. "I don't know, but I feel watched always." Miss Marple stepped back, her presence unseen, and considered their fear. The stain, like the brooch and the poison, seemed designed to unsettle, to fracture trust. But whose trust, and to what end? At tea, the household gathered in the drawing-room, the air thick with suspicion. Lady Beatrice, her hands trembling, spoke of leaving Harrow House. "I can't bear this constant dread," she said. Geoffrey protested, his voice sharp, while Clara sat silent, her eyes downcast. Dr. Quill, pouring tea, made light of the stain, suggesting a servant's carelessness, but his jest fell flat. Mrs. Trent, her smile cold, remarked, "Someone wants us frightened. I wonder why." Her eyes flicked to Clara, who paled further. Miss Marple, her knitting a steady rhythm, noted Dr. Quill's quick glance at the curtains, as if ensuring they were unstained. Later, Miss Marple spoke with Elsie in the scullery, her tone gentle. "You mentioned Miss Vane's vial, my dear," she said. "Have you seen anything else? Perhaps a handkerchief, scented with lavender?" Elsie hesitated, then nodded. "I found one in the laundry, ma'am, but it wasn't Miss Vane's. It was Mrs. Trent's, I'm sure." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving new connections. Was Mrs. Trent involved, or was the handkerchief another planted clue? As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, the lace curtains now clean but heavy with implication. She thought of her old friend, Mrs. Bantry, who had once said that fear was a weapon sharper than any knife. The second stain, the hidden knife, the lavender scent, all were pieces of a deliberate design meant to manipulate. Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking, her mind as sharp as ever. The puzzle was complex, but she was closing in, stitch by careful stitch. Chapter 7. The Truth Unravelled. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Harrow House, its warmth at odds with the chill of suspicion that had settled over the household. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the drawing-room with her knitting, appeared as serene as ever, her needles clicking in a steady rhythm that belied the sharpness of her thoughts. The series of unsettling events, the crimson stains, the reappeared brooch, the poisoned wine, the threatening letter, the hidden knife, had woven a tapestry of deceit, and she sensed the moment was ripe to unravel it. The household, frayed by fear and mistrust, was gathered for tea, an occasion Miss Marple had quietly orchestrated to lay bare the truth. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her hands trembling as she poured tea, spoke of her hope to restore peace to the house. Geoffrey Harrow, his face drawn, sat close to Clara Vane, whose delicate features were taut with anxiety. Dr. Ernest Quill, his joviality strained, sipped his tea with a forced smile, while Mrs. Lydia Trent, her dark eyes gleaming, watched the room like a hawk. Miss Marple, her expression one of mild interest, began to speak, her voice soft but carrying the weight of certainty. "It's curious, isn't it," she said, "how these incidents, the blood, the brooch, the poison, the letter, the knife, seem designed to frighten rather than harm, almost as if someone wished to sow discord." The room stilled, teacups pausing mid-air. She drew the charred letter fragments from her handbag, laying them on the table like a challenge. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Geoffrey's jaw tightened. "This letter," Miss Marple continued, "threatens ruin unless an engagement ends. A serious matter indeed." She turned her gaze to the curtains, now pristine. The bloodstains, too, were theatrical, smeared, not spilled, with a scent of lavender in one case. And the brooch, hidden in a vase dusted daily, reappeared as if by magic. The poisoned wine, curiously, harmed only Mrs. Trent, and only mildly. These are not accidents, but acts of manipulation. Lady Beatrice's cup rattled in its saucer. "But who would do such things?" she asked, her voice quavering. Miss Marple's eyes, bright and unyielding, swept the room. "Someone with intimate knowledge of this house," she said. "Someone who knows its routines, its secrets." She paused, letting the words settle, then turned to Dr. Quill. "You, Doctor, have been most attentive to Miss Vane. You treated her in London, did you not? For nervous exhaustion, you said. But perhaps you knew more of her troubles than you've shared." Dr. Quill's smile faltered, his florid face paling. I only wished to help," he stammered. Miss Marple's needles clicked once, a deliberate sound. "Help or control?" she asked gently. "You knew of Miss Vane's past, her entanglement in London. You wrote this letter, didn't you? To frighten Mr. Harrow into ending his engagement." Clara's eyes widened, and Geoffrey leapt to his feet, his voice sharp. "Is this true?" Under Miss Marple's steady gaze, Dr. Quill's composure crumbled. "I meant no harm," he said, his voice breaking. I cared for Clara. I couldn't bear to see her marry him. The blood, it was from a butcher smeared to scare. The brooch, I took and returned to cast suspicion. The poison, just a trace of belladonna, enough to alarm, not kill. The letter was to make Geoffrey doubt her. He buried his face in his hands. I thought she'd turn to me. Clara's sob broke the silence, and Geoffrey's face darkened with betrayal. Mrs. Trent, her lips curling, muttered, "Pathetic." Lady Beatrice, shocked, clutched her shawl. Miss Marple, her expression unchanged, nodded to Inspector Crane, who had been summoned earlier and waited discreetly in the hall. He entered, his moustache bristling, and took Dr. Quill into custody for attempted poisoning, theft, and harassment. "You'll answer for this, Doctor," he said grimly, leading him away. As the room emptied, Miss Marple remained, her knitting resumed. She thought of a village case long ago, where a spurned lover had orchestrated chaos to win a heart. Dr. Quill's actions, driven by misguided affection, had torn at the fabric of Harrow House, but the truth had mended it, however imperfectly. She recalled her old friend Mrs. Bantry's words, "Love can be as dangerous as hate." With a faint smile, she tucked her needles away. The puzzle solved, the threads neatly tied. Chapter 8. The Lace Restored. The morning sun bathed Fenley Green in a gentle light, as if the village itself sought to soothe the wounds of Harrow House. Miss Jane Marple, her small suitcase packed, stood in the hall, her sensible hat adjusted and her umbrella in hand. The events of the past days, the crimson stains, the reappeared brooch, the poisoned wine, the threatening letter, the hidden knife, and Dr. Quill's confession, had left the household subdued but relieved, like a storm-weary ship finding harbour. Miss Marple, her knitting tucked into her bag, felt the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved, though her thoughts lingered on the fragility of trust. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her composure restored, clasped Miss Marple's hands warmly. "Jane, I cannot thank you enough," she said, her eyes bright with gratitude. "You've saved us from further misery." Her voice held a tremor, but her smile was genuine. The drawing-room, where the first stain had appeared, was serene now, its lace curtains pristine, their delicate patterns catching the light. Yet Miss Marple sensed they would always carry an echo of the drama, a silent reminder of secrets unveiled. Geoffrey Harrow and Clara Vane, reconciled but chastened, stood together in the garden, their heads bent close. Clara's confession about her London past had strained their bond, but Geoffrey's protective arm around her suggested forgiveness. Miss Marple, observing from the terrace, noted their tentative smiles. She recalled a young couple from her youth, whose love had weathered a similar storm, and she hoped these two would find their way. Mrs. Lydia Trent, her sharp tongue softened by the resolution, had departed for a cousin's house. Her parting words to Miss Marple, a grudging acknowledgment. "You're sharper than you look, Miss Marple." The village of Fenley Green buzzed with whispers of the scandal, and Miss Marple knew the tale of the blood-stained curtains would be retold for years, embellished with each telling. She thought of her old friend Mrs. Bantry, who had once said that villages thrived on such stories, weaving them into their fabric like threads in lace. As the car arrived to take her to the station, Miss Marple took a final look at Harrow House, its ivy-clad walls serene but forever marked by the truth she had uncovered. At the station, the same porter, his cap still askew, took her suitcase, and the scruffy terrier sniffed at her shoes. Miss Marple boarded the train, settling by the window. Her knitting resumed as the countryside rolled past. Her mind, ever active, replayed the case, the calculated acts of Dr. Quill, driven by a desperate heart, the fear that had gripped Clara, the loyalty of Geoffrey, the suspicions of Mrs. Trent. Each had played a part, their motives as intricate as the lace curtains themselves. She recalled a saying from her childhood, "Truth, like light, finds its way through the smallest cracks." As the train chugged toward her own quiet life, Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythm as steady as her thoughts. Harrow House was at peace, its secrets laid bare, and she felt the quiet triumph of a task well done. The lace curtains restored to their deep-tailled elegance would hang in Fenley Green's memory, a testament to the sharp-eyed spinster who had seen beyond their delicate folds. With a faint smile, she turned her gaze to the passing fields, ready for whatever puzzle might next cross her path.